In a city where music and culture saturate every street, where the glittering surface conceals a hollow core, sometimes a genuine glance can awaken a heart long asleep. At that glamorous charity gala, Ethan Blake, dressed in a tailored tuxedo but carrying a weary soul, stopped before a woman with no title, no luxury, yet whose sincere eyes kept him still for the entire night. And in that fleeting moment, destiny began to script the opening chapter of a story that completely contrasted his world. That night, Seattle wrapped itself in a radiant cloak, the reflections of the Mopop Museum shimmering on rain-slicked streets. The icons of Pop Culture Gala pulsed with the city's signature rhythm, artistic, extravagant, but cold. Over 300 distinguished guests in the museum's grand hall clinked glasses, posed for photos, and traded business cards beneath chandelier-like LED fixtures, shaped like shattered diamonds. On stage, a famous host praised the honored artist's name so renowned they drew sighs of admiration from the crowd. Amid this sea of people, Ethan Blake, sole heir of the Blake family and future chairman of Blake Holdings, stood silently by the champagne table. His sleek black tuxedo outlined his tall frame. His cropped hair and Patek Philippe watch spoke of status and privilege, yet his eyes betrayed him. They were hollow, adrift beneath the dazzling lights. At 29, Ethan had everything: power, wealth, prestige. But what he lacked was freedom. Since losing his parents in a plane crash, he had been raised under the sharp, unyielding guidance of his mother, Margaret Blake. She not only ran the city's most prominent real estate empire but also maneuvered her son's future like a chess piece. Every gala invitation was an obligation. Every handshake is an investment. Every smile he forced was another mask he despised. He checked his phone for the 5th time in 30 minutes. No messages, only reminders from his mother. "Don't forget to speak with Mr. Jameson. He's selling his hotel chain in Portland." Ethan sighed, set his glass down, and quietly slipped away from the whirlpool of pretense surrounding him. And then he heard it. A warm, steady female voice floated behind the stage. "David, don't worry. This is just your first time. Everyone stumbles at the beginning. You're doing fine, trust me." Ethan froze. The voice was unlike the sugary flattery he had endured all evening. It carried genuine care. He turned and saw her. She wasn't among the glittering gowns and jeweled necklaces. She was kneeling to pick up a fallen napkin, smiling reassuringly at a trembling waiter who had just spilled a tray. Her dress was a simple black, not branded, not sparkling. Loose curls of chestnut hair were tied back, exposing a graceful neckline and deep brown eyes that seemed to see far beyond the surface. Ethan had never met anyone like her, someone who could shine while remaining hidden, strong yet humble. He stepped forward, his own voice unsteady, surprising even himself. "I'm Ethan Blake. I just wanted to say this might be the most impressive gala I've ever attended." She looked up, smiling with polite surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Blake. I'm Marisol Reyes. I coordinated this event on behalf of Hope for Tomorrow." "Marisol," he repeated softly, tasting the name. "It's rare to see someone care so much for the staff. I've never witnessed that at an event like this." "That's because most people don't notice them," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I used to be one of them: weddings, conferences, banquets. I know what it feels like to be invisible. If I can change that, even just a little, it's worth it." Ethan chuckled faintly. "You might have just given this gala its first real meaning for me." In that instant, beneath the shifting stage lights, Ethan realized something within him had changed, not because of the woman before him, but because his long-dormant heart was beating again. They drifted into deeper conversation, moving away from the crowd. Marisol suggested the third-floor balcony, a quieter escape. As they stepped outside, the chill Seattle wind caught her hair, carrying the scent of lingering rain. From the balcony, the city glowed Lake Union, mirroring the lights like a miniature galaxy. The world stretched beneath them, yet Ethan saw only the woman a step away. "Do you love this work?" he asked. "Not always," she admitted honestly. "But I love when things flow smoothly, when a gala funds hundreds of scholarships, when I can remind a backstage worker they matter. And besides saving the world, what else do you do?" She laughed, the sound like soft jazz. I paint landscapes, city streets, candid portraits. I also have a cat named Taco, and I make a mean flan. Ethan laughed aloud, his first real laugh that evening. Sounds like the life I've always wanted but never knew how to begin. Marisol tilted her head, studying him. Really? A man like you wanting something so simple? He met her gaze, unguarded. Honestly, this is the first time I've spoken with someone without wondering if they had an agenda or were trustworthy. You make me feel ordinary. Like I can just be myself. They stood side by side in silence, listening to the distant music drifting upward. When Ethan placed his coat over her shoulders, a simple yet profound gesture, both knew something had begun. The gala slowly wound down, guests trickling out into the night. But Ethan and Marisol remained on that cold balcony, where their hearts had warmed for the first time in years. This wasn't a chance. It was the beginning of a journey neither knew where it would lead, but both had already stepped onto the path. From the night of the gala onward, Ethan was no longer himself. Not in the shallow sense of a man bewitched by beauty or allure, but in something more profound, like someone who had glimpsed a flicker of light in the darkness he once believed inescapable. Marisol hadn't done anything extraordinary. She hadn't tried to seduce him. She hadn't lingered, hadn't slipped him a card, hadn't asked for his number. She wasn't even sure they would ever meet again. And yet, the image of her, a woman standing on the balcony, draped in his jacket, smiling with a gratitude and poise uniquely, her own stayed etched in his mind for days afterward. Ethan returned to his penthouse in downtown Seattle at dawn, for the first time unmoved by the glittering skyline he usually admired from above. He showered mechanically, opened his laptop to finish reviewing contract drafts, but his thoughts kept circling back to their brief exchange. You make me feel like I can be myself. Not everyone could touch a hidden corner of him with only a few words, but Marisol had. The next morning, Ethan woke later than usual, skipping his morning run and scheduled meetings. Instead, he called his private secretary with an unprecedented request to find information on the event coordinator from the gala. It wasn't for recruitment. It wasn't for business. He wanted to see her again openly, honestly. A concise file landed in his internal inbox less than a day later. Marisol Reyes, 27, born in Tacoma. Studied art at a community college before shifting to event management due to financial reasons. I work part-time for Skyline Events while serving as the nonprofit Hope for Tomorrow lead coordinator. I have no assets or scandals, but a string of volunteer activities and outstanding professional feedback. Ethan repeated one excerpt. Clients describe her as kind, composed, capable of solving problems under pressure, and always putting others before herself. That afternoon, Ethan sent an email. Short, not too familiar. Marisol, this is Ethan Blake. If you're free one evening this week, I'd like to invite you to dinner, not for business, to continue our unfinished conversation on the balcony that night. It took Marisol nearly 6 hours to reply. Her response was equally brief, polite, but it made him smile without realizing. If this is about event planning, I'll have to decline. But I'm free Friday after 6 if it's for coffee and flan. They met again at a small cafe on Capitol Hill, nameless, modest. One of those places Ethan had walked past countless times without noticing. Marisol arrived early, seated by the window with a worn book in her hands. She was as unadorned as before, a beige knit dress, an olive coat, her hair loose around her shoulders, but her welcoming smile was just as warm and gentle, as if she had never really left him since that night. Dinner flowed easily. They spoke of things that didn't matter, and yet mattered deeply, simply because they wanted to know each other. Marisol recounted her first wedding job, where the bride fled before the vows, and she had to manage 2 feuding families through tears and outrage. Ethan confessed that as a student, he once ditched economics class to spray graffiti on an old pier, to feel the rush of rebellion. They spoke of no wealth, status, or legacy, only person to person. Do you ever want to paint again? Marisol asked as they shared the flan she had ordered especially for dessert. Ethan paused, then nodded. Yes, sometimes. Especially after endless meetings, I want to paint something that isn't a revenue chart. She laughed, the sound like soft bells. You know, I don't think you hate your work. I think you hate that you never chose it." Ethan looked at her, and in the quiet space between the clinking of spoons, he felt something unfamiliar. He wanted her to know everything about him. Not the version society saw, but the honest Ethan, burdened with loneliness, weariness, and fragile dreams he thought had long since died. They left the cafe close to 9. Ethan offered her a ride home, but Marisol declined. "I'm taking the bus. Don't worry, the stop is just 2 blocks away." Before leaving, she turned and said, "Ethan, I've met enough men to know when someone's wearing a mask. You don't seem like you're trying to be perfect, and that makes me want to see you again." Ethan smiled, the first genuine smile rising from deep within. "I won't promise perfection, but I promise I'll be myself." They kept meeting. Once turned to 3, then 5, until the number blurred. Some mornings, Ethan brought pastries to her small office in South Lake Union. Some evenings, Marisol came to watch him speak at a TEDx talk on redefining sustainable real estate. She was the only one who stood and clapped enthusiastically when he finished. Neither spoke of love, neither rushed. Yet each time their eyes met, the world seemed to fall silent. Marisol introduced Ethan to the animal shelter where she volunteered. There, he met Nacho, a dog abandoned as a pup, now slowly learning to trust again because of her. She led him past the cages, naming every animal, telling every backstory with a passion that made them feel like her family. Ethan had no words. He reached for her hand. Marisol didn't speak either, only tightened her fingers around his. The first time he brought her to his apartment, Marisol hesitated at the threshold. "Are you sure?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "I've never been more sure of anything. Nothing rushed, nothing like in the movies." She stepped into the luxurious space where every detail exuded wealth, yet it was immaculate, too immaculate, as though no one truly lived there. "This place has no footprints," she whispered, "as if no one's ever been let in." Because no one ever made me want to open the door," he replied. They sat by the glass wall overlooking the city lights. Ethan spoke of his parents, the last phone call before the crash, the hole that would never heal. Marisol listened silently, her hand resting lightly on his back, a quiet anchor. That night, no lines were crossed. But the next morning, when Ethan awoke to Marisol cooking breakfast in his kitchen, wearing his apron, humming a Latin tune he didn't recognize, he knew. This was the family he had never had. A month later, Ethan drove her to a vacant lot outside downtown. "I once wanted to build affordable housing here," he admitted, "but my mother opposed it. She wanted a premium office complex. Still, I never forgot this place." Marisol walked among the weeds and broken concrete, then turned to him. "Then why not now?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Because now I have someone who makes me want to do the right thing. Not to prove anything, but to know I deserve it." As they left, Ethan held her hand tightly. He didn't say love. She didn't offer promises. But in that clasp lay everything: sincerity, hope, and a future they were willing to step into, no matter what storms awaited. There are kinds of love that don't need promises. They take root in small things, in breakfasts made together, in a glance exchanged across the window each morning, or in the comfortable silence when two people sit side by side with no need to speak. That was how Ethan and Marisol loved, quietly, without display. They never announced it, changed their social media statuses, or posed for golden hour couple photos, and yet anyone looking could see. They were becoming the best versions of themselves, because of each other. After 6 months of dating, Ethan asked Marisol to move in with him. At first, she refused. "Your apartment is too spotless. It feels more like a showroom than a real home." Ethan only smiled. "Then make it messy." And she did. Her paintings began appearing on the walls. Burnt orange throw pillows she adored softened his cold grey sofa. Wildflowers from the farmer's market filled vases on the dining table. Each morning, the kitchen smelled of coffee she brewed in her old ceramic filter, instead of the expensive espresso machine he had once used only for show. When the city fell into uneasy sleep at night, they often sat on the balcony, the same place where they first met. Seattle was never truly quiet, but together they felt peace. Ethan changed, not only his life but also his thoughts. He began declining investor meetings, which violated his sense of ethics. He dusted off plans for affordable housing, the very project his mother had once crushed. Though still working for the non-profit and running events, Marisol began sketching ideas for a community art space where children without resources could paint, sing, and create freely. Neither of them demanded that the other change, but their presence transformed as naturally as breathing. Even in a luxury apartment, Marisol remained herself. She still used her old phone, wore thrifted clothes, and rode the bus to work. When Ethan offered to buy her a small electric car, she refused. "You can give me a car, but you can't give me the feeling of walking toward my dream alone. I still need to take the steps, even with you beside me." Ethan nodded, understanding deeply for the first time. Love was not fusion, but two independent souls choosing to walk side by side. Weekends became their ritual. They cooked together. Ethan learned to make enchiladas from Marisol's mother over Zoom. Marisol learned to bake French bread because Ethan said it was the dish his father once made. Once foreign to him, the kitchen was now where they laughed the most. On quiet evenings, Marisol painted in her workspace, while Ethan read nearby. They didn't need to do anything special to feel happy. Simply existing in the same space was enough. Their love blossomed quietly, like a hidden spring amid the city's fog and pressure. But life was no fairy tale, and Ethan knew this better than anyone. He was still the heir of Blake Holdings. And his mother, Margaret, was not a woman to accept change lightly, especially when it came from a woman she dismissed as of no proper background, words she once delivered over a phone call laden with subtle warning. "You're paving the way for scandal, Ethan," she had said in her usual composed tone. "A CEO living with a girlfriend without status? The press won't ignore it. The shareholders won't approve. Then let them disapprove," Ethan replied, his voice like steel. "I don't live for them." "And what about family?" she countered. "How far do you think you'll go without them?" That question echoed in his mind for days, not because he doubted his decision, but because he knew his mother never spoke without calculation, and she would not stop at words. Marisol knew nothing of those conversations. Ethan wanted to keep her shielded from the storm for as long as possible. But when you love someone, you also inherit their unrest, and Marisol, with the intuition of someone grounded in reality, began noticing small shifts in him. He lingered in thought after calls. He came home late some nights without explanation. He still loved her, still cared, but his eyes no longer carried the same ease. A layer of worry shadowed them. One night, lying together after a picnic on Whidbey Island, Marisol whispered, "Is there something you're not telling me?" Ethan was silent for a long time. Then he turned, meeting her gaze. "My family doesn't accept you," he said. "They think you're unfit. They think I'm being manipulated." Marisol didn't flinch. She only nodded. "And what do you think? If they can't accept you, they're no longer my family." To Marisol, those words were a declaration greater than any confession of love. Yet they also carried a shadow of fear. Not fear of losing Ethan, but fear that he might lose himself. She didn't want to be the cause of a fracture between him and his blood. She didn't want their love to become a battleground for forces that had nothing to do with the heart. And then, the cracks appeared. Ethan began receiving anonymous emails claiming Marisol had once dated a man with a criminal record. Documents arrived at the company questioning whether his relationship was influencing financial decisions. Worse still, a doctored photo surfaced on a finance blog. Marisol, seemingly intimate with another man at a bar in Tacoma. Ethan knew it was false. But public opinion didn't need proof, only suspicion. He raged. He wanted to sue, fight the press, and shut everything down. But Marisol was the one who held him back. "I don't want to be the reason you lose your path," she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "If you have to choose between me and the world you've built, I want you to choose what keeps you standing." "No," Ethan whispered, pulling her into his arms. "You're the only thing that makes me want to live truly." They said nothing more. No fights, no accusations. But from that night on, Ethan understood. They were no longer simply loving in the light. They were fighting to keep that love alive in the shadows others had cast. There are things you think you've buried, things you believe you've left behind with adulthood and a heart in love. But all it takes is a door left slightly open, and the old ghosts slip back in, carrying the chill of the past and haunting the present. Ethan felt this truth more clearly as his relationship with Marisol grew more serious. It was no longer about casual dates, just hand-holding on balconies. They lived together now, dreamed together, and began shaping plans for a future intertwined. Marisol was no longer a passing presence. She was essential, and that very fact made his family uneasy. Margaret Blake, the woman who had single-handedly kept Blake Holdings afloat after her husband's death, was not one to ignore anything she deemed a risk. To her, Marisol was the clearest sign yet of Ethan's loss of control. No pedigree, financial background, or social standing, the girl was, in Margaret's eyes, a scratch on the polished veneer of the Blake family. And Margaret did not tolerate scratches. The first call came from Liam, Ethan's cousin, and the company's strategic advisor. His voice was calm as always, but Ethan caught the probing beneath each word. "We need to talk, E. People are starting to notice. Too many photos of you and her are surfacing. Our Singapore partners ask if you plan to marry someone outside the financial world." "Outside the financial world?" Ethan echoed, his tone taut. "Since when does love need a balance sheet to be acceptable?" Liam sighed. "It's not about love, it's about power. You've added her name to your apartment deed, haven't you? You've given her access to project files. Are you certain she doesn't have other motives?" "More certain than anything else," Ethan replied, ending the call. But he knew it was only the beginning. Weeks later, the signs multiplied. A project Ethan had been leading was abruptly reassigned to Charlotte, another cousin who had never cared for social housing initiatives before. His proposals were repeatedly postponed at executive board meetings. Meanwhile, by coincidence, Marisol was denied a city partnership for which she had already received verbal approval. The reason? Shift in funding priorities. Marisol didn't complain. She didn't blame him. But Ethan saw the hurt in her eyes. She understood. His family had started to tighten the net. The breaking point came one Friday night. Ethan returned late from a grueling shareholders' meeting to find Marisol holding an unmarked envelope on the sofa. Inside was a stack of photos, Marisol with another man, entering a bar, sitting together, embracing lightly in farewell. "Do you know him?" Marisol asked, her voice calm and frightening. Ethan lifted the photos, his expression hardening. The man was Matteo, Marisol's childhood friend, someone she had mentioned before. A man who had once spent time in juvenile detention but had rebuilt his life, is now working as a youth counselor. Ethan had never met him, but he knew the friendship was genuine. "There's a note on the back," Marisol added, handing him a scrap of paper. The ink was scrawled, messy. "Beware of people with two faces." Blood roared in Ethan's ears, not at the claim's absurdity, but at its intense cruelty. Someone wanted them divided, and no one had a stronger motive than his family. "Do you think your mother did this?" Marisol asked. For the first time, suspicion flickered in her eyes. Ethan didn't answer immediately, but inside, something cracked. The next day, he went to his mother's estate in Queen Anne, a mansion where sunlight never seemed bright enough to thaw the cold edge of Margaret's words. "You're wrong, Mother," he began, standing in her study. "About what?" she asked without looking up from her papers. "About using dirty tricks to drive me and Marisol apart." This time, Margaret raised her head. Her eyes were not angry, only chillingly calm. "I've done nothing. I've only given you a clearer view of the bigger picture. If a few truths or what looks like truths shake you, then perhaps it was never real love." "She hasn't done anything wrong," Ethan said through clenched teeth. "Not yet. But if you hand her everything, sooner or later you'll pay for it. Call it strategic foresight." Ethan rose, his jaw tight. "You don't know her, and you have no right to destroy what I've built with her." Margaret's composure didn't waver. "I have every right to protect this company. Your father died to build it, and you're tearing it down for a girl no one knows." Her words struck like a blade straight to his chest. Ethan left the house without looking back. But the ghosts didn't stop there. One evening, after teaching an art class to homeless children, Marisol came home to find the apartment door unlocked. Ethan had been at the office all day. Heart pounding, she stepped inside. Nothing seemed stolen. Nothing except her paintings. Every piece she had worked on for the past 2 years was gone. On the table lay another envelope, this time stamped with a law office seal. Notice of intellectual property infringement artworks alleged to contain unauthorized use of Blake Holdings' assets. Ethan's fury was so great that he could barely speak. He knew some of her works depicted cityscapes inspired by his company's projects, but they were interpretations, not theft. "I'm sorry," he kept repeating. "I swear I'll fix this." But Marisol only looked at him quietly. "Are you sure we'll have anything left to protect?" Ethan pulled her into his arms, his voice raw. "We'll survive this, I promise." But deep down, both of them knew. The ghosts of family of power, manipulation, control had entered their home, and they would not leave easily. That morning, Seattle was veiled in light rain. Not the kind that came crashing down, but the lingering drizzle of the Pacific Northwest, so persistent you never quite realized when you were soaked. Ethan sat in the kitchen, the air still carrying the scent of coffee that hadn't been brewed, staring out the window. The home that once brimmed with warmth, laughter, and the smell of baked bread was now hollow, suspended in memories like paintings that had faded before ever being framed. Marisol was no longer there. She hadn't left in anger, nor with a dramatic goodbye. She had left a letter on the table folded neatly, free of bitterness and accusation. Ethan read just 2 pages repeatedly through the night, searching for something he couldn't name. Perhaps vindication. Perhaps a hidden sign that she still loved him. Or maybe he only hoped the letter had been misplaced, that fate had said farewell to the wrong person. Marisol wrote that she needed to leave the maelstrom before it devoured them both. She wrote that the love they had built with kindness and trust had been shadowed by something unnamed, not betrayal, not an ending, but a drifting away. Slow, steady, inevitable, like streetlights fading in a rearview mirror as you drive off a familiar road. You didn't take the wrong turn, but still left. "I can't love you while having to prove every day that I deserve to be loved," she wrote. "Love is not a balance sheet. I can't keep defending myself against the person I love most." Ethan held that letter and sat by the window all night. He didn't cry. He couldn't. He didn't know whether to weep for losing her, or for failing to keep the best part of himself alive when he was with her. The following week, Ethan didn't set foot in the company. He declined meetings, postponed commitments, and ignored his mother's calls. Not out of defiance, but because he realized her words harsh, wrong, domineering had nonetheless carved themselves into his subconscious. And perhaps, in a small, cruel way, she had been right. When love turns into a battlefield, it wounds not only the lovers but also the humanity they share. No one knew where Marisol had gone. She deleted her social media accounts and turned off her phone. Even Jamie, her closest friend from Skyline events, could only say she needed a break. Oh, Ethan, hollowed out, did the only thing he knew how. He buried himself in work. He revived the long-stalled affordable housing project. He stepped down from specific executive roles at Blake Holdings, handing control to younger, less conventional teams. He withdrew from several bank boards simply because he felt it was time for change. But beneath it all, he was only filling a void he couldn't name. Ethan began gathering Marisol's old paintings in the apartment, now inhabited by just one. She had captured the smallest corners of life. Pike Place Market at dawn before the tourists came, an empty bus at 11 p.m., the trembling hand of a woman clutching a coffee cup in midwinter. Works that once seemed like fleeting sketches now opened doorways into her soul. He framed them, hung them across the apartment, as if living with the shadows of her, the part of her the world couldn't erase. He didn't search for her, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew, if Marisol wanted to be found, she would have left a trail. A month later, an envelope arrived. No sender's name, only a postmark from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Inside was a single photograph, Marisol, standing before a massive wall of graffiti art, brush in hand, hair tied high, her white t-shirt splattered with paint. No message, no words, just an image. But it told him more than language could. She was still painting. She was still alive. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he closed his laptop and called Matteo. "Is she okay?" Ethan asked, his voice hoarse. Matteo sighed. "She's not okay, but she's trying to be. And you, if you really love her, don't wait until everything is clear before returning. Some people won't still be there to hear your apology." Ethan hung up without another word. But that night, for the first time in weeks, he sat at his computer and began writing an email. Not to justify, not to explain, but to speak the truth. "I don't know what words could be enough for you to understand, but if there's even 1% left in you for me, read this to the end." He wrote about the pain of watching her walk out of the elevator, about the blind fury he felt when her projects were sabotaged, about the suffocation of being trapped between trust and expectation, about that night when he couldn't answer her question, "Do you still believe in me?" Because he was wrestling with another, "Do I still believe in myself? I've let too many people write questions for me. Let too many others place the periods where my story should go. But you gave me the silence to put down my question mark. And now, I will find the answer myself." Ethan didn't hit send. Not yet. He saved the draft. And the next morning, he booked the earliest flight to Santa Fe. Not to persuade her to return, but to show her he was still the man she once trusted, not unscarred, unshaken, but brave enough to step back into the light. The plane touched down in Santa Fe, on an afternoon wrapped in honey-gold sunlight and cool, dry air carrying the scent of earth, pine, and somewhere, wildflowers. Ethan left the small airport without checked baggage, an entourage, or a map. He only had a photograph of Marisol standing before a wall of vibrant graffiti, brush in hand, her smile blurred with paint, and a faint address scrawled on the back in handwriting, "Plaza Vieja." Behind Oldward's bookshop, he hailed a taxi. No call ahead, no warning message. Partly because he wasn't sure Marisol would even want to see him, but mostly because he didn't want to intrude on the world she was rebuilding, piece by piece, with her own heart. Santa Fe was nothing like Seattle. No skyscrapers piercing the sky. No cold steel gray of high-rises. Everything seemed to move more slowly. Adobe walls, red-tiled roofs, wooden doors painted turquoise, and the sound of a Spanish guitar spilling out of a cafe tucked beneath twisted old trees. Time here wasn't measured in hours or minutes, it flowed in footsteps, in brush strokes on canvas, in the gaze of people who lived slowly enough to see each other. The taxi stopped in a narrow alley leading to the central plaza. Ethan stepped out, inhaling deeply. His heart thudded fast, not from anxiety, but because for the first time in weeks, he was walking towards something he dared not name. Hope. The Oldward's bookshop rested quietly beneath an ancient oak, its weathered sign faded, its glass door plastered with handwritten flyers. Literature classes, poetry nights, fundraising art sales. Behind it, just as the note had said, was an open courtyard bordered by adobe walls. Sunlight spilled through strings of fluttering papel picado. And in the center of that space, Ethan saw her. Marisol sat at an easel, her back to him. Her hair was tied back, her white t-shirt streaked with blue paint. Beside her, a girl of about 8 was sketching clumsily, giggling as Marisol leaned over, gently guiding her hand. Their laughter mingled with the breeze, light and tender. At that moment, Ethan realized something both painful and true. She didn't need him to be happy. She had learned how to heal herself. Their love might have been necessary, but it did not define her. He didn't know how long he stood there. Long enough for the little girl to run off for water. Long enough for Marisol to glance up, turn, and see him. Their eyes locked, and suddenly, every sound fell away. Neither spoke, neither moved. Both stood still, as if even time itself was holding its breath. At last, Marisol spoke. Her voice was not cold, not angry, simply steady. "Why are you here?" Ethan took a slow step toward her. "Because you sent me the photo." "I didn't." Her interruption was sharp. He froze. "Jamie did," Marisol added, eyes fixed on his. "She said you needed to see I was okay." Ethan gave a slight nod, as if confirming aloud what he already knew. Hope had never been a signal. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked, his voice rough whether from the dry air or months of silence choking his throat. Marisol didn't answer right away. She turned and laid her brush down. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you're willing to face." "Face what?" "Yourself." "Loeb." Her words sliced through layers of pride, striking raw flesh beneath. And Ethan knew she was right. He had lived too long in a world where every word carried double meanings, where every decision was scrutinized, where love itself could crumble without trust. "I didn't protect you," he admitted, eyes lowered. Marisol said nothing. "I let others speak for you," he continued. "I let doubt eclipse trust. I thought I was fighting for you, but I was fighting to save my image." "Oh." Still, she stayed silent. The wind stirred, rattling the colored flags overhead. Ethan stood waiting for words, for a sign, for anything. Finally, Marisol spoke a single sentence. "Walk with me." Ethan nodded. They strolled along the cobblestone streets, side by side, hands apart. Late afternoon in Santa Fe carried a strange tranquility, as if anger and grief had no choice but to soften to exist here. They didn't speak at first. Ethan did not attempt to fill the silence. He had learned that sometimes silence is the only place two people can stand without further hurting each other. It was Marisol who broke it. "Do you remember the painting I made of your apartment? The one with the open window and the tree you planted?" Ethan nodded. "You said it was your first real home." She stopped, met his eyes. "I repainted it. But this time, the tree isn't there." "Why?" "Because the tree didn't die. It just wasn't standing there anymore." "Lo." His chest tightened, breath caught in his throat. "Do you want me to come back?" she asked, her voice stripped of blame, only carrying quiet sorrow. "No," Ethan said. "I don't want you to come back. I want us to begin again, if you're willing." For the first time since seeing him, Marisol smiled. Not because she forgave, not because everything was resolved, but because she understood. The man standing before her had traveled a long distance, not from Seattle to Santa Fe, but from guardedness to the nakedness of his heart. They stopped before a wide mural, the one from the photograph she'd sent. Marisol gazed up, then pointed to a small unfinished corner, two hands clasped together, faint lines, colorless. "This part isn't finished," she said. "Can I paint it?" Ethan asked. "No. But you can learn." And as the sun sank behind the distant mountains, Ethan stood beside Marisol, holding a brush for the first time in years, not to create a masterpiece, but to touch himself again, through her hand resting lightly over his. On his first day in Santa Fe, Ethan didn't stay with Marisol. Not because she hadn't invited him, but because he knew some distances had to be respected as part of the healing. Instead, he rented a small room above a pottery shop on the city's edge, where he could see the violet Jemez Mountains in the distance and the golden fields bending with the wind. The room had no air conditioning, no TV, just a creaking wooden bed and a pine desk by the window. He began his mornings differently. Waking early, he would walk to the cafe where Marisol often stopped before her art classes. He didn't order coffee to go. He sat with a notebook, the first he had touched since abandoning his dream of painting 15 years ago. Each morning, he sketched a little, a carved wooden door, a man playing harmonica on the street, or simply Marisol's eyes, the gaze he could never quite capture in words. Marisol said nothing about his staying. But on the third morning, when Ethan arrived at the community class in Plaza Vieja to paint with the children, she had already prepared a chair for him, a set of watercolors, and an apron embroidered with the words, "Beginner's Heart." She didn't explain, he didn't ask, but both knew it was a silent invitation for him to enter her world, not as her ex-lover, but as a humble student of life. The children quickly warmed to Ethan, perhaps because he was the only adult who didn't try to teach them anything. He didn't correct their lines when they drew off proportion. He didn't scold when they painted outside the edges. He only asked, "Why did you choose that color?" Or, "If this animal could speak, what story would it tell you?" Their answers made him laugh, and sometimes fall silent more than any boardroom ever had. From a distance, Marisol watched. She saw a different Ethan, not the CEO, not the heir, not the man whose choices had once broken her heart, but a human being, simple, gentle, trying to understand the world again through children's eyes. One afternoon after class, Ethan asked Marisol to take a walk. Not through the busy streets, but into the countryside where dirt paths wound through open fields. Old adobe houses leaned against the sky, and where the air was so clean every word spoken seemed rinsed of its weight. "Do you ever think," Marisol began as they sat on a boulder overlooking the valley, "that we'll never return to the way things were?" Ethan nodded. "And I don't want us to." She turned to him, brows furrowed. "I think," he continued, "if we went back to the way things were, then all the pain, the wounds, the choices, the losses would mean nothing. We have to be different. Not better, not perfect, just truer." Marisol was quiet for a long time. Then she laid her hand over his, so lightly it felt like any pressure might shatter the fragile thing between them. "I'm not ready to love you again," she said honestly, "but I'm ready to walk with you a little further." Ethan smiled. He needed nothing more. In the weeks that followed, they gave themselves no labels. Not lovers, not friends, not exes. Simply Ethan and Marisol, two people coexisting in the same art space, walking through flea markets, cooking dinners with vegetables from the small backyard garden. Some evenings, they read side by side without a word. Some afternoons, they made paper dolls with children and ran around the courtyard as if they too had never known heartbreak. Ethan learned how to brew café d'ola the way Marisol liked it, and she, in secret, commissioned a wooden frame to hang one of his earliest sketches, a half-open door with light spilling through. Both knew love would not return on the back of sweet gestures alone. Only presence, patience, and honesty could lead them toward each other again. One day, Marisol brought Ethan to an empty lot about 30 minutes outside the city, the land she was negotiating with the local council to build a permanent community art space. "What will you call it?" Ethan asked as they stood in the windswept clearing, the mountains glowing with late afternoon Sunday. Marisol smiled. "I don't know yet. I don't want to name it too soon. Not before I know what it will truly become." "Like us," Ethan said without thinking. Marisol paused, then nodded. "Like us." And in that moment, they both understood. They were amid an unnamed journey. One without vows, without a mapped destination but marked by each step laid down with the last scraps of truth they had left. Autumn arrived in Santa Fe like a soft sigh. Not hurried, not boastful, just leaves turning golden layer by layer, dawns carrying a chill in the air, and long shadows stretching across red-brown adobe rooftops at dusk. In this setting, Ethan and Marisol still walked side by side. No rush, no excess words. They were learning to be present without explaining, love without naming it, and trust without vows. Ethan still rented the small room above the pottery shop, but he found himself at the community art class nearly daily. The children now called him Mr. Ethan, tugging at his hands to show him their drawings, asking him to paint a tiny part, or simply sitting close to him during lessons. Perhaps they sensed something they couldn't name in him, a presence without agenda. Marisol saw it, day after day, and within her, something began to melt within her, not anger, suspicion, but the distance that once compelled her to leave. She knew apologies or belated bouquets could not resurrect love, but Ethan had not apologized. He had stayed. And that, more than anything, was what unsettled her heart. One late afternoon, the wind rose suddenly as they and the children cleaned up after class. It was not a storm, but strong enough to send sheets of paper flying and make the children laugh as they chased their work across the courtyard. Ethan darted into the yard, arms full of rescued drawings, hair tousled, clothes dusty, calling back to Marisol with a grin between breaths. "I've never seen wind so stubborn." Marisol looked at him, then dusty, disheveled, clutching a rainbow of paper, and laughed. The sound was so natural that the children joined in, laughing without knowing why, only that the moment was beautiful. That evening, Ethan laid a small sketch on the table over dinner in Marisol's backyard. It was a copy of one of his older drawings, the half-open door with light spilling through. But this time, he had added something new, a scarf, Marisol's scarf, hanging beside the frame. "I've never drawn you," Ethan said. "I never dared. I thought I'd ruin it, but now I realize you're not inside the frame. You're right beside it." Marisol said nothing, her eyes fixed on the drawing. Long and soft, the wind still moved through the courtyard, like a song without words. "I knew this day would come," she said quietly. "The day the wind returned. North wind, wind of memory, wind of things we thought we'd left behind." Ethan nodded. "I knew too. And this time, I won't run." She poured him more wine. Red ripples glowed under the string lights overhead, casting dancing reflections across the wooden table. Ethan squeezed her hand lightly. No further words, but in that slight pressure lay an unspoken vow that they were ready to face what came. Days later, Ethan received a call from Seattle. Margaret, his mother, had been hospitalized after a mild stroke. An uncle spoke on her behalf, voice grave. "She asked to see you." Alone. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He walked a complete circle around the Santa Fe Plaza, then sat beneath the tree where he had first seen Marisol painting. The wind moved through, no longer gentle, but not bitter either. The kind of wind that forces decisions. That evening, he told Marisol, "I want you to go," she said softly. "Whatever has happened, she is still your mother. I don't need you to stay to prove anything." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "If I go, I want you to come with me this time." And, her brow furrowed, "Are you sure?" "Not sure what will happen, but sure that if I face my past, you're the best part of my present I want beside me." Marisol smiled faintly. "I won't go back to fight. I'll go only for you." 2 days later, they flew to Seattle. The city greeted them with cold rain and damp air. But this time, Ethan didn't feel alone. He held Marisol's hand in the hospital hallway, waiting to be called in. And she didn't pull away for the first time since their breakup the year before. When they entered the room, Margaret lay there, thinner, frailer, but her eyes still sharp. Ethan stood at her bedside, silent. Marisol stayed back, still holding his hand. Margaret's gaze lingered on her for a long time. "You're still here?" she rasped. Marisol didn't answer. Ethan's grip tightened on her hand. "Mother," Ethan said, "I didn't come to argue. I came to tell you, I've chosen my life, and Marisol is part of it." Margaret didn't react at once. Slowly, her expression shifted from disdain to exhaustion. "You've changed," she whispered. "Because for the first time, I'm myself," Ethan replied. No one won. No one surrendered. But Ethan left his mother's room without the frost in his chest for the first time. That night, back at his old apartment in downtown Seattle, Marisol stepped inside and stood still for a long time. Everything was still there, the orange cushions, her paintings, the window where they had shared their first kiss. But it was no longer the place she had left. It was the place she had chosen to return to. Not because she was pulled back, but because she had walked in alone. Ethan asked quietly, "Do you think the wind will come again?" Marisol smiled. "The wind always returns, but this time we know how to stand." Winter in Seattle was never the kind of winter you saw in films. No soft snowfall outside the window, no bare trees trembling in icy gusts. Instead, it was endless dampness, heavy grey clouds that hung low all day, and a chill that seeped from the soles of your feet straight into your throat. And yet, strangely, when Ethan and Marisol returned to the place where they had once broken apart, the early winter cold felt like a thin blanket, just enough to remind them of their need for each other. The small apartment on Capitol Hill was no longer the same. The scent of paint and wood smoke from the fireplace had faded with time. The paintings, once hung carefully in the living room, were gone, only empty frames, and a few nail marks remained. But neither of them wanted to move. Neither suggested starting over elsewhere. Both knew, if they could not heal where they had been wounded, then any other beginning would only be escape. On their first day back, Ethan threw every window open. Cold air rushed in, whipping the curtains, toppling books from shelves. Marisol stood in the living room, arms folded, smiling through her shiver. "What are you doing, freezing the memories out?" "No," Ethan answered, "just letting the place breathe again." And so they began. There was no plan, no discussion of what we should do, no timetable, no label. They existed ordinary, tender, as if everything too big had already been said. Now was the time to live. Each morning, Ethan rose first, made coffee, and placed a cup by the window where the winter light slipped silently between the blinds. Marisol never said thank you aloud. Instead, her smile was at the first sip, a subtle nod, and a glance warm enough to thaw him. They didn't rush back to old careers. Ethan took an extended leave. Marisol turned down 2 solo exhibition invitations. Instead, they wandered the city, the narrow alleys they once passed through, cafes they had sat in without ever noticing the barista's name, free Thursday museum nights, the bookstore where Marisol once vanished for hours among shelves of post-war art. One grey afternoon, they sat at Discovery Park, gazing at Puget Sound. The sky stretched dull and tattered, the water dark, the wind biting against their faces. Marisol leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "Do you think we're trying to start over?" Ethan paused, then shook his head. "No, I think we're learning how. To stay, to stop running." It felt as though peace had finally settled when, one morning, Ethan opened an email from the Blake Holdings board. They were inviting him back as CEO. Rumors of Margaret's declining health had leaked to the press. Some feared a power vacuum. Others saw Ethan as the safest bet. He read the email, closed his laptop, and said nothing to Marisol for 3 hours. At noon, while she was chopping onions in the kitchen, he walked in and wrapped his arms around her from behind. His hands rested on hers, light as though he feared breaking the fragile thread they had just mended. "They want me back." "Do you want to go back?" she asked, without turning. "I don't know. And if I said I don't like that world?" Ethan kissed her hair. "Then I'd ask, is there a way to face it together without losing what we've found?" They didn't speak of it again that day. But that night, Marisol placed an empty frame in the living room. "We'll paint this together," she said. "Not to sell, not to show, just so that if there's ever one last painting in our lives, I want it to carry both our brush strokes." And they began painting. A little each day, no sketches, no debates, just instinct and a wordless dialogue of color. Ethan didn't refuse the board, but he didn't accept outright. Instead, he set conditions. If he returned, it would be as an independent advisor, and all profits from luxury housing projects would be redirected into art education funds for low-income neighborhoods. At first, the board fiercely resisted, but Ethan's speeches, community efforts, and steady presence alongside Marisol at conferences on art for the people began drawing press attention. Public pressure forced their hand. Ethan wasn't returning to reclaim power. He was returning to redefine it. Margaret, though she never spoke of it, did not oppose him. Age and frailty had softened her grip, and perhaps, in some quiet way, she understood. Her son had found his own path without dismantling the family legacy. A year after their return to Seattle, Ethan and Marisol hosted a small exhibition at the community art space they had built together. No press, no journalists. Only friends, neighbors, the children from their classes, and a few street artists who had once worked alongside them. The exhibition was titled, "Where the Wind Ceases." At its center hung one piece, the canvas they had painted together for 365 days, untitled, unsigned. Yet everyone knew it was a silent map of a journey traced not on land, but across 2 hearts. Ethan stood beside Marisol, his hand clasping hers. Someone in the crowd asked, "So, what are you two to each other?" Ethan turned. Marisol smiled and answered, "We are the people we choose, every day." No applause, no cheers. But the light falling on the painting seemed to nod. That day was warmer than usual. Birds crossed the sky. Ethan rose early and brewed coffee. Marisol emerged, hair tousled, scarf in hand. "Where are we going today?" Ethan smiled. "Anywhere, as long as you come." She nodded, turned, then looked back. "Do you think the wind will still return?" He was silent for a moment, then said, "The wind will always return, but this time we no longer fear it.